Welcome to Smart Talk, a series of interviews with world-leading economists. I'm Andrew Mazzoni, president of the Henry George School of Social Science. Today I'm speaking with Dr. Jack Rasmus. Dr. Rasmus teaches economics and politics at St. Mary's College in California. He is also the author of many notable books, including his newest, Looting Greece, A New Financial Imperialism Emerges. In this episode of Smart Talk, we will look at the themes in his works, including the assertions of rising instability in the global economy. I'm Andrew Mazzoni, and this is Smart Talk. I'll start off by setting the stage on something I did a week ago. I gave a talk in New York City on the implications of the Trump election. And one of the things I said was that, Donald Trump, talking about the free trade and the offshoring and the things that we're familiar with, I argued that Donald Trump really didn't understand what happened there. He thinks it's stupid people in America who made some bad policy mistakes and allowed this to happen. And I argued on the contrary. This was a conscious policy, thought through, and maybe reacted on, and some mid-course corrections. But essentially, the policy that America followed was set in 1942. After the Battle of Stalingrad, policy planners realized we would win the war, and that we didn't want to recreate the conditions of World War III with autarkic growth and capitalism, and so that we would have three centers, could take up the slack and absorb shocks better with a tripartite setup rather than, each country for itself. So that Donald Trump, although he understood that outsourcing and all that occurred, he thinks by bringing in some smart people, he can recreate and rectify the past if he's true to what he says, which I don't really believe anyway. But anyway, I want to pick it up there. I argue that American elites are fully conscious of what they did here, and in effect, basically made the decision that they could run a worldwide capitalism a la Rome, and they really did need the working and middle class of America as a perpetual stoker of their engine. So I wanted you comment on that, whether I'm right, wrong, or I'm arguing the American policy planners knew what they were doing, generally speaking. They made a mistake in thinking that they could maintain a technological lead after World War II when they rebuilt Germany and Japan. I think they missed the boat in understanding that new equipment with a smart labor force that existed in Germany and Japan wouldn't necessarily always be behind the loop technologically speaking. And once that was apparent, then the policy planners at the time, also facing in the 70s labor disaffection and social problems, the Black Revolution, the Young Revolution, people not happy with the status quo, basically made the decision to outsource and hedge their bets and go an international route, and figure they could run a virtual system and outflank American workers and American labor. And of course, when the communists fell, then it really opened up a labor pool to make that strategy workable. Your comments on that general thesis?
Well, I think if you go back to World War II, what you see, the U.S. was preeminent economically following the war, and had a free rein for several decades simply to expand and export goods and services and export money capital throughout the world, including in particular Europe and Japan, which were pretty much under its economic influence and control. And that worked, that free hand for expansion, both at home and abroad, worked until about the mid-late 60s, when you started getting competition rising in Europe and in Japan. And competition began to cut into corporate profits abroad. At the same time, the U.S. labor movement had reached an apex of capability of protecting wages and benefits by the late 60s, early 70s. We had the second largest strike wave in U.S. labor history in 1971. And unions, large unions, steel workers, auto workers, Teamsters, led by construction workers, were getting 20% first year increases in wages and benefits in a 3-year contract, and very large strikes. Business could not control it, so Nixon was brought in, and that's why you got the wage freeze and the wage controls and so forth. At the same time, Nixon's new economic program also gave a leg up to U.S. corporations in competition with their European counterparts at the time by devaluing the dollar. In other words, ending the Bretton Woods system, where the dollar was pegged to 35 for the gold. In other words, Smithsonian Agreement devalued the dollar. And with the end of Bretton Woods in the 70s, what you got was the central banks trying to coordinate and the managed float, as it was called. And central banks came to the fore as the main engine or source of currency stability, and therefore preventing devaluations, which were so terrible during the 30s, and of course lack of trade during the war period. This system broke down in the 70s. The immediate post-war U.S. system broke down with Bretton Woods, and we saw economic crises in the 70s, and the decision was made, I think, by big corporations who reorganized themselves into the business council and so forth to tame labor and tame these social movements, which they did during the 70s quite well, and also to begin expanding in a new direction, as you put it, globally, beginning in the 80s. This is sometimes called neoliberalism. This is the new strategic policy mix that was developed in the late 70s, actually under Carter, and implemented then aggressively under Reagan, and ever since then, we've had just versions of neoliberalism, different emphases. Under Clinton, it was more free trade. Under Reagan, it was we're going to have the Plaza Accords, and we're going to tame the Japanese, and the Louvre Agreement, and tame the Europeans. But free trade and elimination of controls on international capital flows in the 80s, led by the United States, begins this globalization and financial globalization of the capitalist system globally. And ever since then, we've seen a deepening of that and a growing attempt to compress wages and benefits in various ways, and to expand finance and financial capital markets and capital gains opportunities, and U.S. taking a lead in globalization. And then, of course, as you mentioned, the opening up of the Eastern Europe and Soviet Union, and then the opening up of China just accelerates all this even further. And tax cuts after tax cuts for corporations and investors, changing of the job markets to prevent more part-time, temp, contingent labor, low wage. At the same time, now we got the gig economy, the latest version of all this. This is neoliberalism that breaks down in 2008, and they're trying to put it back together, relying on monetary policy, which clearly boosted capital incomes but didn't do anything for earned incomes at all. And now you see the revolt. Bringing in Obama, I think, in 2008 was a conscious decision by the elite. That wasn't by accident. This guy was brought up from, South Chicago, Harvard-educated intellectual, spends one term in the Illinois legislature and one term in the Senate, and then he's brought in at the last minute in the 2008 campaign and pushed to the fore. He represents what I think the elite's effort to manipulate a kind of a left populism that they never delivered on. And now what you got are the elites manipulating a right populism with Trump. And he won't deliver either, in my opinion. But people are being fooled again with a mirror image policy that's really coming from a certain sector of the U.S. elites who were split on whether they should do that or just continue with this central bank version, free trade version of neoliberalism, or whether they needed to shift to a new policy mix once again to keep the whole show going. And I think the Trump election reflects that split in the elites, and the elites that said, no, we need to move on to a whole new version, neoliberalism 2.0, which has elements of Reagan as well as the later versions under Clinton and Bush. It's kind of a new mixed of neoliberalism, and that's what we got now.
Yeah, I would say, continuing this discussion, do you think that Trump himself is conscious of all that's gone on in the past? I mean, he's identified certain trends, the globalization and so forth. But again, like I said, he sees this as accidental and contingent. He doesn't give any appearance of understanding the policies that were put in place to make this happen. That this was not a bunch of idiots that all of a sudden decided to globalize way back when, and they screwed it up, and now he's going to come in and fix it. I mean, it's almost as if he's a guy that really doesn't get it, but he struck a chord with middle America, who's been decimated by these policies. And I think the elites were caught flat-footed here with Donald. Now, Donald will figure it out sooner or later that he goes along, he gets along with the big boys. He'll make a lot of money. He'll have bank support for his real estate and so forth. But on the other side, he's got the Bernie movement, the young kids who also see lack of opportunity and understand more what happened. And of course, they shunted Bernie aside. They wanted Hillary to sit on the lead. But if we go back to first principles, I mean, the United States was built on protectionism. I mean, if the story is really looked at, and the funny thing is the Hamilton boy in the play that so jumped on the vice president, Alexander Hamilton really set the stage by saying to America in 1800, look, free trade for us is a non-starter. Sure, we can be a very efficient agricultural producer, and England can be a manufacturer, and we can trade in the short run and theoretically be better off. But free trade has a time dimension which nobody mentions. And so Hamilton says, look, basically, let's build up our own industries, even if it's inefficient in the short run. In the long run, the gains from manufacturing, economies of scale, learning by doing, will allow us to far surpass England. And by 1870, that, of course, happened. We had free trade within the country, and we had protectionist elements versus the world. And free trade within the country was okay because you were dealing with the same capital structure, same education, same environment, same situation, more or less, where you wouldn't have one side totally putting the other side out of business, which is the case today when you have powerful manufacturing countries go into the low-wage labor arbitrage situations and violating the real tenets of free trade and just doing wage arbitrage, which you so eloquently described in your works. Now, this is a dead-end situation as far as I can see. You're going to bifurcate the world. Americans really do not have a clue as to what's happened. You've documented almost a $9 billion shift in wages from middle and lower class people to elites over the 15-year period by various mechanisms, taxes, tax changes, union busting, deregulation, which allowed the elites, New York, LA, and so forth, to prosper wonderfully. as bankers and financiers for this transformation, but they really left the other country behind. They left the Trump country really as a second nation, a Brazil of America, if you will. Now, I know you feel passionately about union movements and repairing bargaining power and all of that, but we've got a situation here where I truly believe that the elites don't visualize truly a coherent nation, even though they would argue, List would argue, Hamilton would argue, Eric Reinert would argue. You have to have a balanced economy with all sectors of people working at it. You can't do a Rome today and hive off, all of the manufacturing to somebody else and dominate it financially forever. Can't do that. So you have a situation where New Yorkers especially are very upset about Trump. They're wondering why the country's so upset. You come to New York, everyone's basically happy here. This is a good, what are you talking about? Free trade works for us. Three-quarters of our money coming in here is from overseas anyway. And all of the supports mechanisms, lawyers, accountants, and all of that, they feed off that. The media feeds off that. So they're seeing a wonderful world here. They're not seeing, they're scratching their heads about how could Hillary have lost this election. And so I don't think the genie can be put back into the bottle here. What do you think?
Well, you make a number of important points. First of all, regarding Trump, I think initially he wasn't as aware, but he's learning very fast about a new plan that's being put together, sort of in stride, you might say. My view of Trump is that he's going to be on certain policies. He's going to be a very traditional Republican neoliberal. That's tax policies and regulation policies. On trade, I think a lot of talk of the campaign is not going to happen on trade. I think his strategy is to publicly look visible, attacking individual companies, but he's going to be a free trader, but a bilateral free trader. Negotiate case by case, not multilateral free trade. I don't think major changes are going to come in the NAFTA agreement, and that's going to be delayed for some time before any changes. In the meantime, he's going to make it look like these bilateral renegotiations are really attacking free trade when they're not attacking free trade. So I think a lot of the free trade talk is a lot of lies. You're not going to see jobs come back in mining and manufacturing and so forth, but you're going to see a lot of smoke about the individual companies. The Carrier deal, the Ford deal are really subsidies, not to move jobs overseas. They're not really attacking these companies for moving jobs overseas. So free trade, I think, is going to shift in its form from multilateral to bilateral. You're going to see a continuation, a big focus on massive investor corporate tax cuts and deregulation coming. And what you're going to see with Trump is to keep his right-wing base close to him. He will be very aggressive on social policies. EPA and already anti-union already with this guy Pudzer and immigration. He's going to act very tough on this social side of these issues, while he acts very neoliberal on the traditional side. That's how, the deregulation of the taxes is how he's going to keep the Republican elite, in his camp. And on the other hand, he's going to keep his lower middle class radicals, if they're radicals, contained with these social policies. And he's going to try to fake it with workers about trade and those kinds of issues. This is how I see him governing going forward. The other point you made was situation with American or U.S. economic elites. Do they really need the American worker as much? No, they don't, because it's a global economy now. It's a financial economy now, and they see the opportunity and have seen it for a couple of decades now, at least since 2000, the ability to make even greater profits from financial asset investment and reduce taxes to pass that through to shareholders and investors even more than before, as relatively more lucrative than real asset investment, creating jobs and so on and so forth. This is the change in finance capital in the 21st century that I believe a lot of economists, even liberals, like Krugman and others, just don't see. Those people were trained in the national income and product accounts, looking at real assets and real investment. And their DSGE models reflect that don't forecast very well anymore. They don't understand how the elite has made this major shift to a greater relative focus on financial speculation and financial asset investments. It's far more profitable, less risky, and the returns are so great that this is the way U.S. capital has moved in the 21st century. Until we understand that, I don't think, mainstream economists, I'm very critical of them. I don't think they understand finance and what's going on with shadow banking and all the highly liquid financial asset markets everywhere, and how in a global economy with a new technology, you can arbitrage and move this around instantaneously. This is where the real profits are being made. And you see this already in the shift. The stock markets have tripled, right?
Absolutely.
So that's where the action is, I think.
Okay. Well, they control the money issuance, the quantitative easing. If you check that out, how much they've created since 2008 to today, it's about $4 trillion, and that's about the increase in the stock market valuation, $4 trillion. So by suppressing wages, using low-wage products coming in, and basically having unlimited cheap labor and access to resources, they can sit on the inflationary side, on the product side, and all new money goes to the asset side. It's almost like counterfeiting. I mean, in a way, they're creating this money. We as Georgists, we say, you're using real estate and monopoly as a sort of set of assets to loan against and speculate and drive this kind of financialization. And we would argue we should tax monopoly out of the system and use that as the means to run governments. But they're not going to do that, because that would cut the financialization right out. And then if you look at financialization from a workers or a union point of view, I mean, it's a perfect way, rather than arguing with labor about at the point of production to take their money and push them down there. Why not wait until they invest and put the money for their pensions in the stock market and then clip it from that end, and you take it away from them in the back end much easier than on the front end. And I don't think workers understand that. They financialized mortgages, personal debt, education, everything. So, the workers are besieged at the point of production, and in their savings, what they are, they're taken out that way. So the American worker, being the high-priced worker in the system, is essentially confronted with a take-it-or-leave-it situation now. And, of course, the real truth of the matter is you could have kept your standard of living in America and Europe, and you could have rebuilt Asia the same way we were rebuilt. You could have invested in Asia and let them build their own markets and internal structures without having to arbitrage our people out of existence in doing that. But there was no money to be made at the rate they're making it now with the policies that they've implemented. Now the problem here, I think, is I think history shows us that when a country, any kind of system, going all through history, when 1% of the population takes 30% of the wealth of 30 plus, bad things happen. It's just too much of a pull for the appearance of it. And of course, you're seeing that in America now with Trump and Bernie. And with the acceleration of technology, robotization, monopoly, sweeping money into a few hands, the system really has no release valve. And then you're running into an impending environmental constraint. So if you look at it from a big picture point of view, and you watch the policy actors, there's really no way out for these current policies. I mean, with Hillary Clinton, you'd have had to sit down and slow the system down, perhaps. Donald brings the system into real play and accelerates the built-in contradictions to a tremendous degree. And I really, if I were an investment banker, and I hate to pick on the Goldman Sachs, the JP Morgan as symbols, but these are smart, bright people. They know what you and I are talking about. They get that. But if you were them, you're lucked into a nice situation, you're making good money, you're living good, you know that chances are nobody can corral this beast anymore. Why not just sit on it, play it out, enjoy your life, and after me the deluge?
Yeah, as far as that last point is concerned, it reminds me of Charlie Prince. When the crash came in 2008, they asked him, didn't you know this was going to happen? Yeah, and he said, yeah, sure, we all knew it was happening, but when you go to the dance, you got to dance with somebody, Individually, they know if they try to individually bucket their shareholders, their big shareholders would dump them in a New York minute, as they say, right? So they have to go along with it, and they know the direction. They're smart people. I agree with you. They know what's happening, and they know that you can't continue this concentration of wealth. According to the one of the latest Emmanuel Saya's studies on his World Income Database, 97% of all the net income growth since 2009 has gone to the wealthiest 1%. And just came up with another release here just a couple of days ago, which showed that the bottom 50% households' share of national income has dropped from about 20% to 12%. And conversely, 10 to 20% for the wealthiest. That concentration, as you say, can't keep on, because in real terms, what it means for the mass of wage earners in this country, except for the very, very small percentage at the top who maybe work in tech, what it means is that they are being consigned to no growth and no hope. The problem is with the millennials. The millennials, the largest group now, there's no hope. I know some of them. I have some of them in my family. They're extremely upset, and I don't blame them, because what do they got? They graduate with degrees and they got low-paid service jobs, if they got those. And then they have to patch together part-time contingent jobs, temporary work, if they can find those. And now they got gig jobs. What you got is a major radical retransformation of the labor markets, and it's the millennials who are taking the hit on this, and they're going to radicalize before the rest, I think. And then you have the older folks who for 8 years now have no returns on their fixed income, grandma, grandpa, zero interest, on their CDs and savings accounts and so forth. And you don't have you have a slow rolling privatization of Medicare going on that's going to now intensify. So it's the older folks, who aren't going to be that politically active unless it's just voting. But it's the younger ones who are really being screwed. And I don't see a solution in the labor movement. I spent years there, and the labor movement has been decimated. It's been cowed. Its leadership has only one strategy, and that's to beg with an open bowl for the Democratic Party. And they are no force at all, virtually no force anymore, and their influence is declining even further. So what form the millennial rebellion will take is yet to be determined, I think.
Okay. Well, of course, that suggests a question. Had this debate with many people here, Why did the American people allow this to happen? I mean, this is a case where by 1965, working and middle class people were in pretty good shape in this country. You know, the Roosevelt compromises, all of that, the fact that we expanded into a vacuum, it was almost like another open frontier, really made it that period of, as we look back now, really a halcyon period. It wasn't perfect, but there was plenty of opportunity. And this has all been swept away. And the question is, are the American people culpable by essentially falling asleep at the switch here and allowing this to occur? We have an argument in New York that basically says, look, everyone's getting what they deserve. They didn't see it. They didn't get educated. They didn't move to New York. They didn't get into the swing of finance. Screw them. What do you want from us? You know, we're supposed to get stupid because they didn't get smart. I mean, it's a real feeling of elitism, even permeating down to the second and third tiers of the support system in New York. They basically say, well, what the hell's you know, you guys didn't defend yourselves, didn't protect yourself, and now at the 11th hour, you're complaining about it, and you want us to give back our lifestyles, which are quite nice. And you know, what would your answer be to those people?
Well, if you look at what happened in the 80s, 1980s, you had actually the late 70s, you had the corporate elites taking a much more aggressive activist role within the Republican Party to make sure the Republican Party reflected its neoliberal policy positions and preferences, which it did. The Democratic Party, which was always a coalition, you know, some unions and so forth, and community groups and so forth, thought that Reagan would be temporary. He wasn't. He was a part of a deeper trend. And by the late 80s, we see the corporatization of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Leadership Conference, which is the corporate money wing, takes over. And by the end of the Clinton administration, has full control of that party. And that party moves from a kind of Roosevelt, LBJ social consciousness, I think, to a junior partner to the neoliberal project. So people don't have a voice. At the same time, their unions throw in with the Democratic Party. They always were close, and they give up fighting as well. There were a lot of fights in the 80s against Reagan and neoliberalism by workers, but they were localized, and their and their union national leadership sat on them and helped break those struggles to tame them and bring the FLCO clearly under the skirts of the Democratic Party by 1990. When you say they get what they deserve, well, they have no vehicle to express their opposition is the problem in the U.S. We have, the two wings of the corporate party of America now, and there is no independent way to reflect their opposition and different policies. Sanders tried to do that. I think Sanders, it was a naive effort to ever think that he could reform from an inside strategy, the Democratic Party, with all the super delegates that existed. However, he believed that was the way to go. I do not believe an inside strategy can ever succeed in this Democratic Party. Maybe in the 70s and 60s it might, but this is a thoroughly corporatized party, and you cannot reform it from within. So the American people kept believing that there was a solution in the Democratic Party, and they've been continually disappointed, I think. Those that tried to break from it in the last election through the Sanders movement, I think, are getting another education. So all they can do is vote. You see, vote protest. I don't think the people who voted for Trump in Michigan and Wisconsin, Pennsylvania really believed in his policies. I think those people were so angry and wanted change that they didn't get in 2008, and they also wanted to stick a finger in the eye of the elites that they see no difference on either end. That out of desperation they voted for him, for Trump. And of course they're going to get screwed. But until there is some kind of independent, and it's very difficult in the system we got to develop an independent political structure that has to come from below. But we have broken through in severe cases, like the before the Civil War and around the turn of the century and so forth. It's not impossible, though extremely difficult in a non-parliamentary system. But until that happens, I think average Americans are going to continue to be whipsawed between these two wings of the one corporate party of America. And we see now that those elites very cleverly beginning to manipulate the kind of grassroots populist discontent. They've been very clever in 2008 and 2016 in doing this. How long they can do that, I don't know. We will see what happens to the global economy, because we're going to get a little push here in GDP in the next year. But if the rest of the global economy goes in the direction I think it's going to go, which is much, much worse, the U.S. Cannot hide from the rest of the global trends that are going to descend in 2018-19 on the U.S. economy as well.
Okay, well, I would, taking you up on that point, in the talk I gave about Trump, I identified that he's intellectually following a policy prescribed by an economic writer called Richard Duncan. I don't know if you're familiar with Richard Duncan. Richard Duncan has written a number of recent works on credit and the expansion of credit from fiat money, and he's done quite a good job on that. And he basically has been advocating that Trump could build a big public works program by, in effect, making a super QE effort, maybe $5 trillion, and go into building new industries and outflank the fact that we cannot really compete in the current economies, given the way it's structured with lower wages and technology going offshore, that we could borrow our way because of the peculiar setup of our unbalanced imports, requiring the people who export to us to, in effect, lend us the money to continue the process. We could use that and print money to build a whole brand new series of super industries, biotech, really extend some of the cutting edge industries and, in effect, outflank the problem. Of course, if he did that and he started drawing on resources, interest rates would start to go up strongly. And I think we're so highly leveled around the world that if we pushed interest rates 2 or 3 basis points, really, from 1 to 4 or 5%, the debt overhang would just implode back on everybody, and then you'd have a massive depression. So this is the Duncan plan is steering between massive depression and this huge credit fuel boom that's out of sight. Now, much of the talk that he has about the outsourcing and this, that, and everything also comes from Richard Duncan. And all of this idea of he's going to invest in new industries and make America great. If he could read Richard Duncan and do it literally, he would have a chance to do it. He just doesn't understand the forces that impinge upon Donald are really not going to allow that to happen. They're not going to allow anything that would push interest rates up because the game is over. So he can't really deliver on that promise, and he can't deliver on the stopping the outsourcing problem. He can't stop automation and robotization. Perhaps he could cobble together a WPA kind of program for the Midwest where everybody plants trees or pulls weeds or something like that to buy some time. Maybe he can fake a 5-mile segment of the wall in Mexico, carry it out for 4 years, saying I'm doing it. But basically, he landed in the middle of a situation where there's no way out for this guy. Your comments?
Well, I've long advocated a major democratization and change in the central bank. Right now, the central bank only provides credit for banks and shadow banks. But if you had a QE for Main Street, and provide this kind of credit for Main Street policies, real policies, create real jobs and so forth, it might have a significant effect more longer term. But you're not going to see that because very clearly financial interests aren't going to give up their primary institution and democratize it and open it to benefit the rest of the economy. I agree with you that Trump cannot do all that he may think he's going to do. Congress is Republican Congress is primarily interested in tax cuts and deregulation, and they're going to put up with Trump until they get that. And if he pushes any further in terms of a real radical moves to generate real jobs and so forth, i.e., in other words, doing something about free trade, he'll be stopped. He won't be able to pull that off. At the same time, we have a real problem, as you point out, with massive amount of excess debt exists, particularly in emerging markets, and increasingly dollarized debt, so that as interest rates rise in the U.S., if they should rise much further than 1% to 2%, you're going to see a massive capital flight out of emerging markets. You're already seeing that occurring. You're going to see collapse of their currencies, which is already beginning. Even in China, capital flight is becoming a real problem. Devaluation, they're on the verge of devaluation. When that happens, they'll send a shot heard around the world. Europe is chronic stagnating, and now with the spread between bond rates, the money's flowing out of Europe to the U.S. It's flowing out of emerging markets back to the U.S. And what that means is as interest rates rise, how are they going to finance that debt? You see, it's massive and it's dollarized. And how are they going to finance? They're not going to be able to finance that debt. And you're going to see the crisis emerge from outside the U.S. this time. It's not going to be located in the banks and the shadow banks in the U.S. It's going to be outside. And the dimensions and the rate of pace of that is going to have a profound effect on what Trump is going to try to do and the U.S. elites are going to try to do. I don't think that they'll be successful in what they're going to try to do. I don't think Trump is going to be successful for more than a short year with some infrastructure spending going on. It won't be as big as he said. Interest rates, I think, rising interest rates in the U.S. will probably kill more jobs than his infrastructure spending will create in the short run. Wages will not recover. The same problems are still there. I think people are euphoric, particularly investors, thinking, oh, now we're going to have a big change. And you're going to see a temporary period where that hope and appearance may prevail, but that's going to dissipate fairly quickly as the rest of the global economy deteriorates even faster. My book earlier this year, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, Systemic Fragility in the Global Economy.
Yes, I finished that book, absolutely. Wonderful book.
Really is talking about looking at this from a global perspective, not just a U.S. policy perspective anymore. And Trump is very much trying to focus on the U.S. economy, but the bigger problem is coming, I think, and it's coming from outside the U.S., and that will really constrict what he can do and what he can't do.
Well, maybe I can kind of sum it up this way. If we go back to the days of Rome, of course, they didn't have the acceleration of technology that we had, but they had many of the same social problems. Rome launched itself on the backs of its peasant holders of land. They put them in the legions, conquered the world, bankrupted the peasants, took over their lands, brought the slaves back in that these peasants conquered for them, let them work the land, and then dispersed their legions, what's left of them, around the world as kind of outpost guards. And essentially, Rome hollowed out itself and became Rome in various places, Ravenna and so forth, because it didn't need Rome per se. They hollowed that out. You almost have the same situation here, except we have nuclear weapons. I mean, we can really cast the last shot here. We have environmental issues, which are going to be unending and unyielding. And we have Donald Trump, who I characterize for the audience I gave the speech to in this way. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie They Died with Their Boots On with Errol Flynn. It's a movie about George Armstrong Custer. Now, of course, everyone thinks of George Armstrong Custer as the guy at Little Bighorn, but he was a great Civil War hero. And he was accidentally appointed Brigadier General. He just out of West Point, a little before the Battle of Gettysburg. And he finds himself as a Brigadier General in the pivotal battle of the Civil War, running 3 Michigan cavalry brigades. So he's in charge. The orders were for him to sit on the flank and watch. He ignored the orders. He happened to spot Jeb Stuart outflanking the Union Army, coming behind the Union Army just at the point where Pickett's charge was scheduled to hit. Robert E. Lee had scheduled not just a massive charge of Pickett's brigade, but a coordinated attack from behind by the cavalry commander of the Confederacy. I can't remember his name. But George Armstrong Custer disobeyed his orders, took a shot, and said, "I'm just going to go where the action is." And he went there and he got in the way of Jeb Stuart and stopped Jeb Stuart from coming behind the Union lines. The Union lines held, and the Civil War basically was won at that point. And he was characterized as the most irresponsible second lieutenant in the U.S. Army. So perhaps Donald can catch George Armstrong Custer's luck, and he can charge to the sound of the guns and maybe throw everything that we're talking about in a cocked hat. But I think this is really going to remain a movie scene, and the reality will be quite different. But he reminds me of George Armstrong Custer in this situation. He doesn't know what's happened necessarily, but he sees something happening, and he goes and investigates it, and in effect wins the war, not knowing, he didn't know for years, if ever, how critical that accidental decision was. And perhaps we can rely on accidentalism, maybe? What do you think?
Well, Custer ultimately got himself killed, didn't he? That little bighorn, because of another risky move, right? Risky move, sometimes you get lucky. Risky moves, sometimes they get you killed. And, second time he did it, if that was the second time at Little Bighorn, he ended up 6 feet under. My feeling about Trump is that there are some elements of independence there, maybe. But my belief is that he's a businessman and he's a pragmatic, and that he will be tamed. And we are already seeing the taming of Trump, as I wrote last week. And I think we're going to continue to see the taming of Trump. And what we'll end up with is a policy of apparent fiscal stimulus, which will really be tax cuts, and more of the neoliberal strategy, just in different shape and form, perhaps, but more of the same. And the problem with both monetary policy and fiscal policy is that the multipliers have collapsed, in my view. And therefore, you do not get the real stimulus from monetary policy, which we saw. It was either the massive injections, which, if you count traditional bond buying by the central bank, not just QE, probably 10 to 15 trillion dollars of injection, most of which was either hoarded or went offshore or went into financial asset markets. Very little got into real stimulus and investment in the U.S. We see investment declining for the last 10 years in the U.S. It's virtually flat, nothing existing at all. You can't have an economy without a real investment and therefore real job creation and real income creation. That economy is going nowhere. I don't think the fiscal infrastructure spending will generate a change very long or very significantly in that direction. The fiscal multipliers have collapsed as well. I think monetary and fiscal policy has largely been negated by globalization and financialization. And that's fundamental to what's going on. And I think that's the big crisis that they're facing. We saw that monetary policy, central bank policy, benefited the 1% and investors and not the rest. I think we're going to see the same happening now with fiscal policy, but it's going to take a year or two for that to sink in. And during that year or two, we're going to see an intensification of crises in emerging markets in China and in Europe. That's going to be the reality after this sort of party, Halcyon partying period of the next year. You see, the real crunch, I think, is coming in 2018 when all this false impressions of change will wear off. And I don't think the wealthy elites are going to really significantly change for the good of the U.S. because they are global now, and their allegiance and alliance to the U.S. is less than it ever was before. So I don't see any real change coming. I see a kind of neoliberalism 2.0 with some minor adjustments temporarily that will fail. In the meantime, the global economy is going to intensively get worse. And I don't think Trump in his eclectic kind of pragmatic, let's attack this or that, is going to change fundamentally the policies or the direction of what's going on.
Well, I have to say I agree with you, Jack. I think we'll end this little get together, but I enjoy it tremendously, and hopefully, if we ask you again to do another show with us, you will do it. If you have anything significant you want to say, we'll always be a forum for your discussions. So I want you to know we here are fans of your work. Keep it coming. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful body of work. Jack Rasmus, everybody. We get 100,000 hits a month now. We're getting lots of attention. If you want to read the best overall summations of what's going on in the world today, you really can't go wrong with Jack Rasmus. Trust me on this.
I have a new book coming out in March called Central Bankers on the Ropes.
Really?
I'm sure you'll find it interesting.
Okay, well, we have every one of your books, so we'll just add to the collection. Thanks, Jack. I appreciate it. That's it for this edition of Smart Talk. For more information on this and past episodes, please go to our website, henrygeorgeschool.org. I'm Andrew Mazzoni, and thank you for watching Smart Talk.